I think the most important thing is to start at a very young age, explaining to our kids how much we love and value them for something other than how they look, right? That's truly, as the saying goes, just sort of like the cover of the book, that we care about other things a lot more. And so that their sense of self isn't just based on how they look. We don't want that.
Hi, guys, and welcome back to the Thick Thighs Save Lives podcast. I'm Rachel, and moms, and well, basically, if you have a child that is in any way influenced in your life, we have an amazing episode for you today. Dr. Charlotte Markey is with us, and she is the specialist on children, body image issues, and everything in between. And we are so glad to have you on, Charlotte. Thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk with you.
Oh my God, I keep saying us. Kelsey's running late in a photo shoot. I always do this. I've never done it alone. So I'm going to just say us, and that's going to be like just me. It's just me here. Just me. It's us.
It's
It's me
us.
and
It's me
Charlotte.
and you. It's still us.
Yeah. So, Dr. Charlotte Markey is a professor of psychology. You got your doctorate from the University of California in health and developmental psychology with a focus on eating behaviors and body image. So, first of all, like super important work. And you've written now 4 books.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm
So you're
working on number 5, and I'm editing a number 6. So I'm keep going.
So her first book was Smart People Don't Diet. And then your second book was on body positive understanding and improving your body image. And then you got a little bit more into the kids aspect of it, where you did a book called The Body Image Book for Girls, and then subsequently the Body Image Book for Boys. So not only is your work incredibly important and incredibly needed, but your books have been so well received. You've been interviewed by the New York Times, the Today Show, ABC News. Like, people have such amazing things to say about your work. So, first of all, I just want to say congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
And I wanted to let you talk about kind of what inspired you to get into this field and to write these books that have been so important for so many people.
I sometimes think like my whole life brought me here. It's so hard to just pick one thing that puts you on the path of whatever you end up doing, right? I was a dancer when I was young, and I was very serious about ballet. So I wasn't necessarily just like every girl who takes dance lessons when they're little. But from a very young age, then that meant there was just a lot of focus and discussion in my life about bodies, and primarily how thin they were, how thin they needed to be. And so I think I was hyper aware from a very young age of the importance of these issues and how seriously awry things could go for people, because there was a lot of disordered eating in the dance world. And ultimately I left dance. I was focused then more in high school on school and just sort of normal adolescent stuff, sports and cheerleading, and went on to college. And I ended up studying psychology and focusing on these issues because they just were so interesting to me. I think I was probably still trying to sort a lot of it out for myself. And and I don't know, maybe that's what I'm still doing like 30 years later. I'm not sure sometimes. But I just think that, sort of how we perceive ourselves, how we present ourselves to other people, all of the messaging in the world about health and fitness and wellness and what we should eat. And I just think it's all really fascinating, and it presents so many conundrums for, I think, just almost everybody, frankly. I mean, I think that as a mom, I feel it, because you have to sort of sort through your own issues, and then you're also trying to raise healthy kids who feel good about themselves. But even before I was a parent, I was an adult trying to be a professional and, trying to juggle a whole bunch of different balls, and it's tricky.
It's you're right. I when we started diving into these issues, at Kelsey and I, as professionals working in the fitness field and seeing how, like, the level of how disordered things can really get, I think you're right. I think that there is not a person on the planet. I used to think that it was just women, and then I used to think that it was just girls, and now it's just so clear to me that there is really no one that escapes this at some time in their life. And having the tools is just in your toolbox to be able to just like talk about it and think about it and recognize the behaviors is just it's just so important.
Yeah, I agree. And it's unfortunate and it's sad that so many people, I think, really struggle with body image issues and maladaptive eating and just sort of an inadequate sense of self. But if you look at all the messaging that surrounds us online in any form of the media, you just be driving your car and see a billboard. It's like, it's no wonder that most people struggle. Like, we are constantly being told, you're not enough the way you are, you're not okay, you need to fix something, whether it be your hair or your skin or the size of your breasts, or, I mean, there's just nothing that there isn't a product or a service to fix these days. And so, no wonder why we don't know what to do with all that information. We start feeling like, oh, well, yeah, I would like to have bigger breasts. Or, oh, yeah, I wish my legs were more toned. Or, yeah, my skin is aging. I mean, this resonates. It kind of hits us at the core of not just how we look, but who we are. And I also think too, there's something interesting about the idea that, wanting to improve yourself inherently isn't a bad thing, right? Like, wanting to get better somehow across time is not like a terrible goal. I guess it's just sort of, in what areas of our lives are we focusing on, and are we doing those things in a healthy way?
Yeah, it's a very blurry line, and of course there's, for only 19.99 there's a product out there, and it's so driven, by money that it you're right, is you can't go anywhere and there's no area that we're being told we are good enough. And in that way, I want to talk a second about the term body image because it's used all the time. And I really want to define it for our listeners because or your definition of what body image is, because I think before we can start really talking about the importance of it, I think we need to first recognize, like, what are the factors surrounding body image? What does it mean to you?
As a researcher, the basic definition usually is just our thoughts and feelings about our bodies and our appearance. But the longer I've done this work, the more I feel like that definition is too short and really doesn't do justice to what this thing is we're talking about. Because, how we think and feel about our bodies or appearance actually sounds somewhat superficial, frankly. And this is not a superficial issue for people. This is really about our mental health more generally. And we know that body image is really highly correlated with depression, anxiety, disordered eating, other mental health issues. We also know that how we feel about our bodies and our appearance affects our interpersonal relationships. So, things that we'll do, people we do engage with, people we avoid. Um, it's a very social construct, essentially. And it's really more about, I think, both our mental and physical health than just something that's superficial.
I'm so glad you said that because I think people have a lot of shame and guilt surrounding feeling any type of way about their body that, it somehow means they're so vain or all they can do is focus on themselves. And, you're so right that it's so tied to everything that you do. And it's so far reaching in your life that we can't possibly just chalk it up to, oh, come on, like, get your head out of the mirror for a second because you can barely fit through the door. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
for
I think that
sure.
that is So I wanted to some stats. These stats just I looked up some stats before the podcast and on percentage of kids and that are suffering with body image issues, and honestly it just is so heartbreaking. Looking at, I work with women every day, and looking at what we see every day, it's really not surprising, but it's still heartbreaking because if these women are having these issues, you have to at some point recognize that these would be being passed on in some way, or they're being watched.
Yeah.
So I looked at a stat that said by 17, 78% of girls have negative feelings about their body, and 80% of 10-year-old girls have been on at least one diet. And I think about like what a 10-year-old girl looks like, and
Yeah. Yeah.
and like I'm speaking to the girl, but male body image issues I read have also quadrupled over the past 25 years. So these things are now coming down and really having a profound effect on our children. And I was just, I wanted to ask you, why did you decide to write books for these tweens and teens about body image specifically? Like, what drove you to do that?
I think just the longer I've worked in this area, the more I come to realize that, by the time we reach adulthood, a lot of these concerns are pretty deeply entrenched. They can be really hard uh, to work out. And of course, it's possible, but I just started to feel more and more like, well, what if they just didn't start? What if we could just prevent some of these issues, or just suggest to kids that, no, actually, you're fine the way you are. Like, our bodies, our appearances, who we are, we're all unique individuals. We're not going to look like celebrities and influencers for the most part, because they don't even look like themselves. They've been edited. Just to try to offer a different perspective that I think is um, more reassuring to young people, and also just based more in scientific evidence, right? I mean, so much of what young people, or even the college students I interact with at Rutgers all the time, who are in their 20s, so much of what they think about these issues is inaccurate, because they've just been, the subject of too many marketing campaigns. And so, they think they can't eat carbs, or they think that they, like crazy things they'll say to me, like they have to sleep in certain positions or something so that you don't age, or, whatever it is. And this is not grounded in any kind of real science for the most part. So, the objective is really just to offer sort of a reassuring voice to young people, and also offer them good evidence-based information about these topics, so that as they are confronted with more and more real world information that's often misleading, they hopefully have sort of that sense of self, and have the other information, the good information, to just kind of say, no, actually, I don't think that's right.
I mean, I can't even imagine, the stats on how much a person has been marketed to by the age of 18. I
Yeah,
don't I don't think they have stats on that, because it's
yeah,
unlimited amounts, especially with socials. And so the thought that you could at least, can we just provide a counter message? Can we just,
yeah,
that's unavoidable, right? But like, if that's the only messaging and we're not
right,
providing any counter message, there's
right.
no other voices there.
Yeah, I think that gets me kind of worked up too, especially as a parent of my own teenagers. Is, so many of the messaging, it's like the loudest messages, the loudest voices are often the most insane. They're the least grounded in any kind of science. And so, as someone who's been a researcher, who considers myself a scientist for 25 years, I feel like if I don't speak up and try to provide that counter voice, you know, who is necessarily, right?
Right.
And this, which is not to say at all that I'm the only one who tries to provide a counter message. But there's just a lot more money and there's a lot more dazzle around a lot of the diet culture messaging.
So, speaking of diet culture, I think that speaking to the counter message, I think that a lot of parents and any influential figure in a kid's life, teacher, auntie, whatever, they feel that they want very much to work with the kids around them to make sure that they don't grow up with the body image issues that they might have had, but that they are at a loss for what to say, and they don't really have that counter message to provide because they're not really sure what is the best way to talk to a kid who's expressing feelings of unhappiness with their body. So can you speak to for a second, how do we address this with kids if they come forward with some kind of negative messaging about their body? Like, what's the right approach?
I think almost every parent will experience this. And if you have a kid who's less communicative or just kind of shyer, they may not come to you and say, like, my friend at school today said I was fat, right? You might not hear it, but you'll see it in other ways. You'll see them start to wear looser clothes, or you'll see them start to act more self consciously, or almost every kid will have some sort of experience that rocks them, and I think most parents will be in touch with this in some way, shape, or form. And I think the most important thing is to start at a very young age, explaining to our kids how much we love and value them for something other than how they look, right? That's truly, as the saying goes, just sort of like the cover of the book, that we care about other things a lot more. And so that their sense of self isn't just based on how they look. We don't want that. Um, we want to try to open communication up with kids. So if they are hurting and they are upset, that maybe they'll talk with us. And if that ever gets to sort of a clinical place, that then we can also pull in other support for them. But I think what we're most tempted to do if we think our kids feeling insecure about these issues is to say, like, oh, no, no, of course not, you're beautiful, or I think you're such a good looking kid, or to say things like that. And I would never tell parents you can't offer your kids positive feedback about their appearance, but there's a couple things to be aware of. And one is that they don't totally believe us because we're their parents. And so sometimes my daughter will even say to me, like, well, of course you think that, you're my mom, about something, right? um, so that's not enough, right? It's not that we can't be supportive or positive, but we have to also really leave space for them to maybe vent and then to ask questions, to try to get them to be curious about these issues and to develop a sense of self that doesn't rely on these appearance factors. So we want to ask questions like, well, why do you think someone said that? Or why are you so worried about that? Or do you really think that, trying to look like whoever is really that important? Or are there other things you'd rather spend your time and energy on? And it can be hard because this isn't the way I think most of us were brought up necessarily. And so we have to kind of be thoughtful in how we have these conversations. And I think it helps to just be honest and sometimes say, like, these are tough issues that a lot of people struggle with. And I really hope you don't. And I don't have all the answers, but here are some things I do know. And I'm curious what your questions are, what your thoughts are, just to try to, even if you're dealing with a 7 or 8 year old, you'd be surprised that most of them could handle that conversation.
Well, it's so hard because sometimes they'll like, no, 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 you look fine, you look great, you're wonderful, you're great just the way you are, is almost the least painful path because
Yeah.
some of the answers to the questions that you're going to get. Why did some of the questions that you add, like, why do you feel this way? Or who said this to you? Or, all these things are going to probably produce answers that are going to be painful to you as a parent.
Yeah, they can be. But I think, if you can help kids work through that while they're young, you could be saving them sort of a lifetime, literally, of stress about some of this. So if you can say, like, well, do you think that maybe, whoever your friend was feeling insecure themselves, or do you think that they're focusing on these issues a lot because of some of their own concerns? Sometimes what people say to us has a lot more to do with them than us. And that's something really important for kids to
All the
get,
time.
right? It's really hard to
Really
get that.
important for adults to get
Right.
that.
It's really hard to get sometimes. We can all be pretty sensitive, especially to criticism. But if we can open up kids' minds to just thinking about, well, maybe this isn't about you at all. And I think we all really want to raise kids who are healthy and happy and feel good about themselves. And yet we have to remember that there are many sources of that happiness and feeling good about yourself. And kids have different strengths. We all do, right? In terms of being good at music or good at sports or really good in school, or and we will draw people to us who appreciate those things across our lifetime. And that's hard for kids to see if are maybe kind of a nerdy kid who maybe that's not drawing a lot of people to you in middle school. But at some point, that will draw the right people to you, the people that you want to be around. And so I think we have to help our kids to see that. And, some of the flashy, really good looking, really popular people when they're young, that will draw people to you in your youth, especially, but really not forever. Our appearance is a commodity, so to speak, that doesn't always last forever and is just not enough to secure really good relationships or a lot of other things. So
I just love this idea of just preventative medicine,
yeah,
and not really waiting until there's a giant problem to
yeah,
address these things, and just working on them preemptively, because
yeah,
we know what's
it's
eventually
coming.
this is coming. So,
Yeah,
yeah, I love this. And I want to talk about girls versus boys body image issues for a second, because I want to know, in your opinion, if we should be addressing these differently. Are they similar in their baseline? Is it the same kind of feelings expressed in different ways, or should we be kind of tackling these with different language?
yeah, it's really interesting. I think that there are certainly some similarities, but I think the manifestation of the concerns tends to differ. And so when we see girls who are dissatisfied with their bodies, there's often a lot of restriction. So they're trying to not eat certain things. So they're doing kind of what look like adult dieting behaviors or exercise behaviors. And especially, I think, to us moms, they're very familiar. Like we know and we can spot those because most of us have done those things. What's interesting and really problematic is that when boys are having concerns, the behaviors that are a manifestation of those concerns often look quote unquote healthy, and they're often even missed by healthcare providers. And so boys may not cut back on how much they're eating, but they may be trying to eat like more protein. Almost everyone in developed countries gets enough protein. It's one of the very few things most of us are pretty okay about in terms of nutritional guidelines. So that's not a necessary course of action for boys or men. We also see boys oftentimes engaging in more sports or athletics or weightlifting. They're much more concerned about muscularity typically than girls. And again, that can look like a health behavior. And it can be a health behavior, right? There's nothing wrong with being active. We want our kids to be active, but we don't want that activity to be all consuming or to then um, leave our kids in a place where they don't have time to do their schoolwork, or they're not socializing with friends, or it's taking up a lot of mental space.
I just read a recent study that said one of the biggest predictors of how young a girl is going to start dieting is her mother's dieting history. And I know that you said, a lot of moms can immediately spot the behaviors because they look very familiar. And, you know, I want to know if we can really speak to our kids about body image issues while we're suffering with body image issue. Like, can we do this without healing ourselves first? Is this possible to be, promoting a healthy environment for your kids if you haven't yet figured out how to do that in your own headspace?
I think we can, and I think there's really nothing more motivating than our kids in terms of trying to get our own head in order. And so I would argue that even if you feel like you're struggling, first of all, that makes you among the majority. So, don't feel bad about that. That just means that you're human living in this culture that has done that to you, frankly. Um, so you shouldn't feel guilty or ashamed of that. But I think use the opportunity of kids, or if you're not a parent, your students or your nieces and nephews, or people in the next generation that you care about, use that as an excuse to work on yourself a little bit. And even if we're not 100% where we want to be, first of all, I don't know if any of us ever will be 100%, right? I mean, this is what I do for a living, and I don't think I'm 100% where I want to be. Um, but still, I think there's a lot to be said for faking it until you make it. Like, we don't want to say things in front of our kids like, I feel fat, right? Have I thought that? Of course, right? Um, but we don't want to say that. And the thing is, I think too, when we don't let ourselves say those things in front of our kids, we're not disparaging of ourselves, we're not restricting what we eat in front of our kids. Um, it becomes more habitual for us because, I mean, if you're living with children in your house, you can't like hide out from them forever. They find you all the time, it turns out. So, you have
Apparently.
to like, you kind of have to actually start doing these sort of healthier things more often, whether that be how you're eating, how you're talking to yourself, trying to not be compulsive about activity or certain eating habits. And so then, you kind of can develop better habits yourself in an effort to not pass on bad habits or bad thoughts to your kids.
I love that. I love that. And I love that, you're okay. Show up as who you are today and commit to the best that you can do. And you know what? I think it's really important too. And I was a teacher, I used this tactic often of having kids teach another kid the concept that we had learned. And a lot of times they'd be like, well, I don't know. I'm not an expert on it. I don't know. I don't have a degree like you do, Miss Hellier. Don't you think you should teach it? And every single time it was always the same answer, which was you will retain it
Right.
better
Yeah,
if you teach it to someone else. And
exactly.
so like it's almost like working on your kids, like you're simultaneously
Yeah,
working on yourself. And
yeah.
that's a win-win.
I think that's a great analogy. And I think that's exactly right. It's a lot of this is just kind of a lifelong process for many of us. And again, if you go back to sort of what a broad definition of body image is, it's really not just about your appearance or your body. It's about your mental health more generally, and it's about trying to feel, I think, happy and content in who you are. And throughout our lives, we're going to have experiences that challenge us. So even if we're at sort of a steady, good place and we're, almost 100% where we want to be, we're 95%, we're going to have setbacks because life is going to throw something at us. For a lot of people, the pandemic has been incredibly challenging to their mental health with good reason. And, hopefully that won't be a never-ending challenge for us. But something else will be. I mean, this is like just the
Yeah,
real world. This is life, right?
right.
We're not gonna just be in this even keel, everything's great all the time place, because life will challenge us. And that is, of course, also the beauty of life and the excitement of life, that it's not static.
It is the beauty of it. And, when we talk to women about body image issues and body positivity specifically, they're like, I just don't find it possible to wake up and love my body every day. Like some days I'm doing good and some days I'm not. And just like normalizing that and just, staying on the track of like, it's absolutely fine to hate your face today, just as long as you know that your face is not the most important thing about you, And so that's okay because we're gonna, we're working through it. This is life. This is every day. Um, all right, I wanted to talk about food and the language surrounding food because so the thing with kids that I find really challenging, anyways, as a mom, is that we obviously want them to eat nutrient dense food once in a freaking while. Like have a vegetable for crying out loud.
Yes,
So,
I
but
understand.
at the same time, like we want to avoid vilifying any foods. Like these are bad foods or these are not good for you or whatever. So, how do we talk about nutrition and food groups and eating specifically without creating this like weird, disordered behavior?
Yeah, it's really tricky. And some of my graduate training was done at the Penn State Children's Eating Lab, which had some world famous nutritionists and psychologists affiliated with it. And I remember after spending time there, kind of thinking like, oh, well, when I have kids, I'm going to do this totally right. This is going to be easy. Like I know all the things you're not supposed to do. And then of course you have kids and they have their own personalities and health challenges and issues, and it's feeding kids is one of the hardest things as a
Say
parent.
that again for the people in the back.
It's so hard to feed our kids.
uh,
And people are often surprised. I think they would say, maybe generously, that I'm pretty loose in terms of what my kids eat. And I've even had a few friends admit to me later that, like, the first time their kid ever had some kind of fast food or some kind of, like, maybe not super nutritious food was with me. And they were shocked. They were like, but wait, what do you do for a living? And I was like, no, 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 we just don't have time. We're gonna like go through the drive-through, and then we're going to the dance recital, and then it's fine. It's not a big deal. Um, so that's a very roundabout way of saying that I think to be psychologically healthy when it comes to food and to be able to enjoy food, we do want to be really careful as parents about restricting what our kids eat, and also really careful in terms of how we talk about food. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to have every kind of chip in your house and every kind of ice cream and every kind of snack food. And I think it's perfectly reasonable to try to cultivate a home environment that has a lot of nutrient dense food that's accessible, because we know that kids often don't like foods the first time they try them. They have to have repeated exposure to like foods. And sometimes repeated exposure means, like, 7, 8, 9 times if it's a vegetable. So we want those foods around. And then we also don't want to make them undesirable by forcing kids to eat them. Because what we do when we have them around and you have to have some broccoli before you can have dessert is we just make it really clear to kids that broccoli is so bad, I have to reward you to get you to eat this. And it actually tends to have the reverse effect than what we desire. So, you put the broccoli on the table time and time again, and they say no a lot. And maybe you say, ooh, I think it's really good tonight. I cooked it just right, or this sauce is really good with it, or whatever it may be. And you hope they try it, and you hope they keep trying it until they like it. But no one likes any food they were forced to eat. There's just no good data to support that, really. So we have to be careful. And this is not how we were raised either. So it's a real kind of turnaround for many of us who were in the clay, clean plate club growing up, and
You're
dessert was
so
always a
right. You
reward.
can't leave the table, you know. Oh my god.
Right.
It's hard. It's hard to change these behavior. I mean, even as a parent, when you think about that as a child and you think about how awful and damaging that was, you still kind of think, well, I mean, but I don't know. That's just the way. I mean, you know.
Right. Well, because unless you really think about it, or read about it, or really motivated to do something differently, we tend to fall back on what we know, what's familiar to us, right? I mean, we've all found ourselves at some point saying something out loud that one of our parents used to say, that like we swore we'd never say, right? But it's like it's just what we experienced, and that's just it's par for the course. And sometimes I will say, okay, I can't believe I just said that. I didn't really mean that. That's something, grandma would have said. And my kids will laugh. That did sound like grandma, but, um, so it's okay to walk it back if you say something you really think later, like, or even if it's a day later, it's okay to say, I don't think I handled that the best.
That's just like general great parenting advice. Like, take nutrition, take all of that out of it. Like, it's okay to walk it back. It's
Yeah,
okay to say, like, you know what I said yesterday,
yeah, yeah,
because it's such an important skill to not only practice in yourself, but to like cultivate in your children and show that it's okay.
yeah. I mean, and I think too, sometimes, kids don't realize that like we're just winging this too, right? And as my kids have gotten older, there are some things that I think I've let on much more, where I'll say, like, I don't really know what the right answer is here, you guys. Like, I'm not sure. These are the things I'm thinking. And I think there's a lot to be said for trying to encourage like that critical thinking. Like, here are some options, you know? Um, and if it's about food, like, fine. You want to go get yourself Chipotle for the third time this week. I'm going to make a really nice dinner. I'd rather you stay here and eat it. But, why don't you just think about how that would feel and what that experience would be like versus, you know, staying here and having whatever it is you're making.
Oh my God, I can't. That when they're going to drive one day.
Yeah, I know.
Oh God. Oh my God. At least right now I can like serve the plate of food and my son is like, well, this is about it. This is, I can't like get in my car. Oh God. Well, you know what? You know what? You got to loosen the reins at some point. I'm saying that to myself.
Yeah.
Um,
And more, they have more autonomy, right? Whether it be the
right,
cafeteria at school,
right.
they, will go someplace like the mall or something with a friend. That happens surprisingly young, and they will have access to being able to get snacks and stuff on their own. And so we are not just parenting our kids so that they can eat well and feel good about themselves, like in the confines of our home. They
Right.
eventually are spending more and more time out in the world.
I I will say, for a little while I was doing the like 3 bites of broccoli and then and then I'll give you more whatever that is that he wanted. And when it was pointed out to me how harmful that was, and that also those 3 bites of broccoli were not doing, there was so much more harm being done there in the language of food than the 3 bites of broccoli was actually giving him nutritionally, that I started feeling so stupid about using that tactic. But that actually, cutting that out and just providing a well balanced meal with something that I know he likes, and then food I'm hopeful for.
Right.
um, Although there's been a lot of broccoli wasted, I will
Yeah,
say that he has been so much more open. I'll just look over and he's like eating it. And I'm like, oh my God, no one move.
I
No
know.
one move, no one breathe.
I know.
He's eating broccoli.
I know.
So it's like when you took that off, it actually like fostered the environment for wanting to, try that. So yeah, I'm so on board with that advice. Um, I've seen it work in my own life. On exercise.
Yeah.
It's a similar connotation about, okay, we have all these messages about burning calories, about exercise being a punishment for what you ate. Um, we want children to move and exercise. And at the same time, we do not want them to have this unhealthy relationship with exercise that a lot of us, have or have been fed. Is there a good way to talk about, physical activity with kids without kind of making it into too much of a thing like the broccoli?
I think it's important to, again, um, focus on what kids really like here, right? I think that a lot of kids will engage in some sort of activity that they're just that they'll like, and so then encourage that, sign them up for more of that, try to help them become better at that, without it being like a pressure filled experience. But if kids have exposure to different sorts of activities, and you're open minded about what that can entail, because not everyone's going to be good at soccer, then I think it can be just a really healthy, fun part of kids' lives. And a lot of kids are not going to be athletes. And so, then it comes down to, you know, can they walk the dog, right? Do they like to swim in the summer at the community pool? Um, do they like some kind of dance or, karate or whatever? You want them to take self defense classes. I mean, it can be anything. I think it's important to be open minded about what constitutes activity, and again, to really focus on just modeling a healthy relationship with activity. So don't ever talk about it as like punishment, or you know, I have to do this exercise because I had a lot of dessert last night, because it's just not the way we want our kids to think about food and exercise. Um, and it's much better to say things like, well, I feel better if I exercise. I want to stay healthy. I want to, um, you know, for me, exercise is a really important part of stress management. And so I lean into that when I talk about it. You know, mommy's in a better mood if she's gone on a run. Do we want me to stay? Do you want me to go on my run? Um, so there's so many ways that we can all become compulsive about activity, because we get the message that like more is always better. But I would say for most people, it's not. If we are truly raising like an Olympian, then yeah, they're going to spend an obscene amount of time at the gym or in the pool or on the track or whatever it may be. But most of us just aren't. So I think we have to keep that perspective really, front of mind.
Absolutely. And, developing that idea that exercise can be a number of things, that it is, it's really grounded in what you love, taking something that you do with your physical body, enjoying it and loving it, and that it also having the side effects of, making you a healthier person in stress management. I think honestly, a lot of adults could stand to, because everybody thinks like, well, if I want to do this, I've got to go get on the treadmill and I hate the treadmill. And it's like, it doesn't have to be something you hate. And if you are kind of exposed to that idea at a young age, then, it kind of makes it easier to curb those disordered thoughts.
I think too that just like food, if you force it, a lot of times you're going to have sort of the opposite effect than you desire, right? So I think there's nothing wrong with encouraging kids to, try out for a team or to do something because a friend's doing it. But, um, their sports among kids these days can be really intense. And so I think we have to be careful that we're not getting caught up in some of that, and making it something that for a lot of kids is going to make it less fun, because again, most kids are just not going to compete at that really high level. So um, to have like intense coaching and training and personal coaching and all this stuff, maybe it makes sense for a very few and good, but for most kids it doesn't. So
Absolutely. I think that perspective is so important because, sometimes you've got your own dreams you didn't write out and all of a
yeah.
sudden. So, the last question I wanted to ask you is regarding social media because it is there and it is
Yeah.
available
Yeah.
and it is extremely influential.
Yeah.
And, there's no way to shield. You can shield for as long as you want, but at a certain point, we're there. And I just, how important is it to, monitor social media, to talk about social media? And what should we do to make sure that it's not having a negative effect on our kids' body issues?
Yeah, I think the research is really clear that social media can have a negative effect on body image and even mental health, but it doesn't have to. And we're not going to get rid of it. So we have to work within the system, within what we are experiencing. And I think media literacy is really important here. So, really talking to our kids from a young age about how a lot of what they see in the media is not real. It's been edited, it's fake, it's trying to sell you something, that we don't want to aspire necessarily to look like the people we see there. Um, I think it's really hard even for adults to keep all of that in perspective, and yet it's valuable to remind ourselves and to explain to our kids that a lot of the sort of celebrity people we see online or in other media spaces, their job is to look a certain way. Their job is to look good. They have a team of people working on them, whether that be trainers or personal chefs or lighting people or makeup people or whatever it is, and and that's fine. But most of us don't have that job. Most of us are not going to spend all day long, sort of perfecting our appearance, um, and it would be really boring if that's all of us were doing all the time. So I think we want to be careful about sort of keeping those sorts of things in perspective. And there is some data to suggest that some monitoring and some restricting has value. That what kids do online matters. It's not just being in online spaces or social media platforms. And some of my own research I've done in the last couple of years even focuses on this. And we found that kids who are using like Instagram or Snapchat or whatever, they don't look different than kids who aren't in terms of body image unless they're doing certain things on those platforms. If they're following like beauty tutorials, if they're following Fitspiration type hashtags, that can be a problem. So we want to have some conversation with kids about what are you doing here? Why are you following that person? Um, and just teach them that some of those influences can be negative.
I think that's, it's forced us to kind of like have these conversations way earlier than we kind of, are used to, I think, as parents. Like our parents did not have to talk about these things. Oh man, we really got screwed. But I think that, you're so right that these are just conversations that at some point we're waiting. And the earlier that you can have them and really provide that feedback, I think it's so good. Okay, I wasn't gonna ask you this. I went back and forth because I don't know. I have feels on it, but I just have one more question, if you don't mind. I want to talk about where fat phobia fits into this because specifically, I cannot get this out of my head. I had this woman who is in our Facebook group, and she was talking about how she's made the word fat a swear word with her kids. Like they know that they cannot say fat, they cannot use the word fat, like it's like a bad word. And this was, I totally get where this is coming from. Like, her ideas were that, she never wanted that word used on another child or another person as, a harmful bullet. And, but the idea that fat is a bad word was also really bothersome to me. So I just wanted to talk about, like, how do we ride that line with kids where it's like, okay, you know, using those words against someone in a harmful way is an issue, but like, fat isn't a bad word.
Yeah, I mean, the language surrounding body sizes and shapes is really tricky, and it's really evolved. And even the last 5 years, I would say, in terms of how we think about these things and talk about them, and some of the research in terms of what do people at different body sizes even prefer. And it turns out that people of heavier weights actually tend to often prefer the word fat. Like, they feel, fat is just a descriptive word. It's not a bad word. It's just like thin, right? So I think, yeah, we don't want to say fat is a bad word, because then what we're saying is that there's something wrong with being fat, and
Right.
there's something wrong with having different body sizes. But the reality is that we all have different body sizes and shapes, and that's normal. And that's largely genetically determined. So, this idea that we have complete control over our body size and shape is really a myth. And it's a myth of marketing, because the more that diet companies in particular can make us feel like we can control this. We can control our bodies if we just try hard enough, and we just buy enough of their products or protein bars or whatever it may be. The more that we get that messaging, the more we think there's something wrong with us if our body doesn't do what we want it to. But guess what? We don't actually have that control. Even our appetite is largely genetically determined. Some people are hungrier more often and can eat more than other people. So I don't think we want to tell people, if you're hungry more often, like, just to be hungry all the time. That's not like a lifelong solution, right? If you're hungry, you should eat. That's healthy and adaptive.
Say it again, sister. If you're hungry, you should eat,
You should
people.
eat, yes. So,
Please.
I think it's hard. I think what we want to tell our kids, though, is that they don't really want to comment on people's bodies a lot, period. Right? So, and again, this isn't to say that we can never comment on anyone's appearance in a complimentary way. Um, but I actually, one of the girls I interviewed when I was working on the body image book for girls, she was just 14 or 15. Um, but she was so smart. And I remember her saying, I've come to decide that unless there's something going on with someone's appearance that they could fix within 5 minutes, you just don't comment. And what she meant by that was, like, if you have a crumb on your face, or if you got some stain on your shirt or something like
Sure,
that.
you help a girlfriend out.
Right. So if there's like something that, like, you would want someone to tell you, you've got like a
Sure.
booger on you somewhere, right? Like, you'd want someone to tell you that. And it's just a very easily fixable thing. Fine. That was her motto. You can talk about that. Everything else, don't even do it. I thought that was, like, really actually pretty smart for a young kid.
Wow. Imagine, imagine a generation that came up with that messaging. Like, I can't, it's limitless,
I
the things
know.
that they could do, and the amount of shame that they would be able to live without.
I know. It's part of what really keeps me going working on these books and these projects, because I do actually feel a lot of hope. And I feel like a lot of young people today get it. And I like to think that that may be a little bit because our generation of parents, we're trying. We don't always get it right. But I think a lot of us are really trying to do good by our kids as far as these issues. And God, a lot of these kids I talk to, they're smart. They have a lot of this figured out. And maybe they're not exactly where they want to be either, but they have thought through things that I didn't even start thinking about until I was like 30, I think, probably. So I think there's a lot of reasons for hope for the next generation, and there's a lot we can do.
I'm so hopeful. And, the amount that could be done and accomplished in the world with a whole generation that did not think that what they were presenting on the outside was the most important thing they were bringing to the room is, I'm here for that and I'm excited for it. So, please, just you are part of this change. And I just want to say thank you because, like, the work that you're doing is so instrumental in this change. And the tools you're providing to parents and especially our listeners today, like, this makes a difference. And I just want to say thank you for coming on and thank you for all your hard work.
Oh, thank you for all you're doing, and I think this is what keeps me going. So I'm just really glad that there's an audience that's willing to listen and that so many people are really, like I said, being thoughtful about these issues. Because they're tricky, they're complicated issues, and they can be stressful and hard. Um, but there's a lot of change in the works, and I think we all see it in different ways.
Where can our listeners hear more from you? Where can they get more Charlotte Markey?
Yeah, so you can go to the bodyimagebooks4girls.com or the bodyimagebooks4boys.com, and information about the kids' books and other books and media clips and all that kind of stuff is available there, and also a contact sheet if for any reason people want to reach out.
Absolutely. Guys, I'm in the middle of the body image book for boys for my son, and I cannot recommend it enough. If you are a parent or you've got any influence over any child in your life, you're going to want this. So grab her book. Charlotte, thank you so much for being with us. And guys, have an amazing week.
Thanks so much for having me.